G'day folks, Troy Dean here from WP Elevation, and I'm very pleased to have with me, I believe for the second time on the WP Elevation podcast, my good friend all the way from Houston, Chris Lema. Hey Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on again. You are based in, what are you doing in Houston, Texas? You don't live in Houston, do you?
I don't live in Houston. I'm in San Diego, but I am visiting a friend, so I'm out here.
Ah, there we go. And it is 6 p.m. and it is cigar time for Chris Lema.
6 p.m. It's time for a good cigar.
There we go. Perfect. Awesome. Hey, now, for those that have been living under a rock for the last, I don't know how long, who is Chris Lema? What do you do and why are you here?
Well, I am the VP of products over at a company called Liquid Web, which is a hosting company where I have focused on building out the managed WordPress and the managed WooCommerce platforms. Other than that, I blog over at chrislema.com and leaders.blog, where I write about WordPress stuff and leadership stuff. And maybe the thing I'm most known for outside of WordPress and WooCommerce stuff is storytelling. So I think today we're going to talk a little about that.
Yeah, 100%. I was walking to the office this morning listening to the Masters of Scale podcast with Reid Hoffman, which is like my favorite podcast. I love it to bits. And he's interviewing, well, not interviewing, but the story is about Scott Harrison, I think his last name is, the guy that started Charity Water. And it's all about storytelling. Yeah. It's all about how, you know, Scott was this like super wealthy kind of spoilt brat in New York City. He was a nightclub promoter. He was kind of off the rails and had an epiphany, started this, short stories, had an epiphany, started this charity to bring clean drinking water to the world's population, kind of pinged all his friends home in New York and went, hey, let's kind of, donate to my charity. And they're like, are you kidding, dude? I don't donate to charities because like the CEO just gets rich and all the money, like none of the money actually goes to the charity.
Right.
So one of the first things he did was he said, okay, radical transparency, 100% of your donations will go to actually drilling the wells and bringing clean water because we will get philanthropic donations to pay for all the admin costs. And he started telling stories around that, which was his instant differentiator, which I just thought was genius. So yes, we are going to talk about storytelling. And the reason I was so keen to get you back on the podcast is because we were out in Santa Monica a couple of weeks ago and you very kindly came along to speak at our event out there and you told this amazing story about storytelling. It was very meta. You are the master storyteller, so I knew it would be engaging, but you also walked us through a storytelling framework and you taught us this framework by telling stories, and multiple stories within, which I thought was just genius. Before we get into this though, storytelling has kind of risen up again as a very popular topic. Donald Miller wrote Story Brand, which is a fabulous book. It feels like storytelling is becoming front and center again. Why do you think stories are so important for us as entrepreneurs and business owners?
Well, because fundamentally stories are important to us as humans. So it starts, right? People are like, but I'm not a storyteller. I'm like, well, go back and talk to your mom or dad and ask them when you first lied to them, right? And they're like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, right. Yeah, you were telling stories, right? I don't know if it was at 3 or at 4. Those simple stories were like, he did it or it wasn't me, right? But it's just a core of who we are. When you interact with people, when you go to a party or hanging out at a bar or pub and you're hanging out with friends, someone starts telling a story, even if it's just a memory of the group that's there. We remember things in story. If you ever want to share a fact, right, embed it in the middle of a story, people remember the fact because of the story. You take the story away and people don't remember the fact at all, right? And even when they don't remember it and they try and tell it back to you, right, it's still in a story. So the story dynamic is a core part of who we are. If stories didn't work, television would die, movies would die, musicals would die, everything would die, right? Like our chief mode of entertainment is driven by story, right? Yeah. And so you just realize at some point, this is a skill well worth knowing.
I think also one of the things I heard on the podcast this morning with Reid Hoffman on Masters of Scale, which really kind of hit me in the solar plexus as to why I love stories so much, is because stories allow you to explore your humanity without the risk. So this guy referenced stories. He's like, stories are like a flight simulator. You can get into a flight simulator and become a fighter pilot, but there's no risk because if you crash the plane, it's just a simulation. And stories are just a simulation of life. So it removes the risk, but it still gives us the rush and the dopamine hit and the emotional highs and lows, but it's a safe place. I'd never heard stories talked about like that, and it makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
So how do we, as introverts, people who are good with building websites, but we don't really like dealing with clients very much because they frighten us and we're not confident in, asking for a decent amount of money for a website because we just haven't got that confidence and we're not assertive and we don't know how to do that. How can we start using stories to better position ourselves and get the validation and the recognition that we deserve?
Well, one of the most important things, I think you'd agree, and what you teach all throughout WP Elevation, is that it's always about getting the right client, right? That you want to be connected to the right client and not the wrong client. Yeah. One of the easiest ways to think about that is when you watch every single night, the late night hosts bring guests onto their shows, right? And when they bring them on, you realize, okay, it's the job of the interviewer or the host to ask the right questions so that the guest looks like the star. But the star also has to do the work to make so the host doesn't look like a moron, right? And so there's this like if every late night host had to read every book of every author that came on and saw every movie of every actor that came on, there'd be no time for their life, right? So they haven't read the book, they just got a cheat sheet on it. Sometimes they haven't seen the movie, they just got notes. But it's the job of both parties, right, to make each other look good. And you know when you have a good client, the client wants you to win as much as they want to win, right? The wrong client only wants to win often at your own cost, right, at your expense. And so one of the best ways to start figuring out who the right client is to tell stories. Long before you close the deal, long before you even put out a quote, right, or proposal, if in the storytelling exchange up front, there's that good connection, if you can use stories to segment your audience, you can skip past the ones that only want a win-lose dynamic, and you can embrace the ones that are looking for win-win. But to do that, as you can imagine, you have to tell the right stories, right? It's not it's not random. You're not just like, hey, okay, I can do this and I can do that. That is the simplest version of the story, right? I can do X. Why don't you pay me to do X? But that's not going to be a story that helps you segment your audience, right? And so there's several kinds of stories, and we briefly touched upon it when we were together last. One of the ones I talk about is a prediction story, right? And a prediction story is one of the earliest stories that you can tell to a prospect long before they're a client. And even if they walk away, if you've done a predictive story right, they'll come back, right? Because they've anchored to that story, right? So I interviewed for a job once, right? And actually, just to be clear, I didn't interview for the job. I met the guy who was looking to hire people, but I didn't know he was looking to hire people. A friend of a friend said, hey, could you help this guy out? So we went and had lunch, and it became very clear that he was, interviewing because he wanted to hire someone, right? And I said, well, you're probably, as I listened to what his challenges were in his business, I said, you're probably dealing with this, and you likely are seeing this, and here's one of the things we see a lot. And it was a prediction story, right? It was I've had other clients, they've gone through this. So you're describing a pain or a challenge, and you're making a prediction that the person on the other side of the table is feeling that. Now, the very nature of telling that prediction story is that the right person, right, says, you're reading my mail. Like, you're in my, like, what do you have, a camera on me? Like, oh my God, we're totally there, right? And then they can use you as a proxy, right? They can literally just go, okay, you know this. I don't need to know this anymore because I can put this problem on you and I can trust you because you clearly know what's going on. But the best scenario in this particular case happened where I said, you're probably experiencing these things. And he said, no. We're great, right? And you go, oh, well, congratulations, right? And we ended lunch and he left. That was it. And then 3 months later, right, when those problems all hit, he's in a board meeting with the board, and the board's like, hey, didn't I pass on this guy's name? Like, why didn't you call him? And he goes, yeah, actually, that guy predicted that we'd be here. And now they come back and it's a very different conversation. And
Definitely.
from a negotiating position, you're in a very different place because power and experience are asymmetrical, right? So now he's in a spot where he's going, I don't know how to solve this, and you clearly do because you've done it before. So prediction stories, they allow you to define that expertise without walking around saying, I can do this and I can do this. It's not about an I statement. It's a you statement.
Yeah.
You probably are dealing with this. That's the prediction. And you may even tell stories of other companies that have had those problems. Again, you're talking about someone over there. You're talking about you. You're not talking about me. But the very nature of you knowing those stories puts you in a very different position. Either the person says right away, oh my God, you're a perfect proxy. Let me just pass you all the work and I'll get out of the way. Or they say, no, I'm good. And then they circle back. Many circle back later.
Yeah. So I know I can do this because I know how good you are at this. I'm just going to totally throw you in the hot water here, right? Our friend Adam Prizer launched a product called Cart Flows, which you and I know and love. For the uninitiated, it's essentially replicating something like ClickFunnels inside of WooCommerce, right? So it allows you to do one-click upsells, downsells, beautiful checkout forms. It's a fantastic plugin. If you and I were sitting around in a boardroom and with Adam and he said, okay, how do we blow this up? How do we scale this thing up through storytelling? I'm just totally throwing you on the spot here, and I know I can do that too. What would be the story? What would be a prediction story and the reason I'm asking this is because I see so many of our audience writing blog posts about how to use this plugin, how to use plugin X to do Y, right? And okay, sure, fine. If that's how you start off blogging, then that's congratulations for being a blogger, but you just end up being part of the white noise, right? There's nothing differentiating there. So how would you advise someone like Adam Prizer with Cart Flows? How do you advise, what is a prediction story that we could tell that would instantly be a more engaging thing than, hey, this is like ClickFunnels inside WooCommerce?
Right. So you'd say, hey, are you using ClickFunnels? Right? You love ClickFunnels. You get all the stuff you can do. And if you're like my friend Carrie was running two sites, the main site where he was selling online courses, and then separately, he had hired a company that was going to do the landing pages for him. And so the landing page company knew ClickFunnels. So they did everything in ClickFunnels. And then the last button, right, was a button back to his store, right, on his site. So you're running two sites, ClickFunnels because it's hosted and you can have all these cool features, and his site that was his main site and where he had the store. And if you're using ClickFunnels like my friend Carrie, what you may not have done yet is analyze the traffic flow from how many people click a button on a ClickFunnels page and how many people land at the product page over on your store. Now, you just presume, right? I'm guessing that you presume that anyone who clicks a button in one goes to the site in the other, because that's how it's supposed to work. Would it surprise you if I told you that with clients like Carrie and other folks, that they've seen a 60% drop from clicking the button on one site to going to the other? That just moving from one site to another, because in the technological world, you click something, it has to make a remote call, you have to connect, it's got to go over. And if it takes too long, they just close the tab. And you've been sitting here going, I got all this traffic over here, I have way less traffic over here, but it looks like they're clicking the button. If you're living in that space, the first thing I'd tell you is stop doing it in two different places. Put your ClickFunnels-like features over on your store on your own site, and you'll remove all of that, which gives you 60% more traffic. Now, let me ask you a question. Wouldn't it be better if you had all the traffic that wanted to buy your product actually being able to buy your product? Mm. And if they go, well, I'm not having that problem. You go, great. Congratulations. Way to go. If they go, I don't know if I'm having that problem. Let me go check. And they start doing that, and they come back and they go, oh my God, you don't even know how much money we've lost in the last year. And I go, well, I kind of do, right? And they go, okay, so you can do this? You can do that? And you go, of course, yeah. I just use Cart Flows. And they go, oh my God, okay, sign me up.
Yeah. So Adam was saying that, the people that get it. The people that already use ClickFunnels and see the frustrations, they get it. But the people who don't know what a funnel is, there's kind of an education piece there that needs to go on. So what are some of the other stories? We've talked about a prediction story. What are some of the other story frameworks that we can use?
Yep. Now the trick to the prediction story, right, is that if you do it right, almost immediately the customer stops telling you how to do something, right? If you do a prediction story, because you're saying, been there, done that, you can just trust me for this. They stop telling you, put the button here, put the click here, and we both know, right? That's the kind of customer we want, right? The one who's not going to try and be the professional we are in the space we're in, right? The second kind of story that I tell, right, after a prediction story is often a warning story, right? A warning story says, hey, heads up, this is not going to be fast, or this is not going to be easy, or this is going to cost you a lot of money. I sat in a meeting today where a store owner says, my store's horrible, it doesn't work, we spent all this money, no conversions, we're getting a ton of traffic, no one buys. We have the best sale or promotion going on, Google doesn't even pay attention to us. And so we start talking through, right? Like, hey, let me be honest with you. This is going to take some work. Google doesn't know you exist. There's going to have to be some time to that. You're going to have to, and we start walking through warnings. This is not for the faint of heart. This is hard. By the way, I'm expensive, right? And when you tell a warning story, what people realize is you've been down this road before. You're being honest. You're being realistic. Whereas if they interview 10 people and I'm the only one who's sitting here giving them a warning story and everybody else is going, like in the case of the store owner today, he had 3 people who came up and told him, just go to Shopify. And I said, that's interesting because you sell tobacco and tobacco is not something that you use the Shopify payment gateway. Don't you have your own payment gateway? He goes, we do. I go, well, Shopify is going to give you additional charges, right? He's like, what are you talking about? I talked to 5 guys and none of them said this. And I go, well, here's the warning, right? If you choose a platform with an integrated payment structure, they make more money on payments than they do on your monthly fee. And you're going to get hosed because you're going to have to pay your payment gateway and you're going to have to pay the fee to the platform. Oh, why didn't they tell us this? Why did no one tell us this, right? So again, you start segmenting. There's a group of people who are going to say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to go my own way. Great. But you have the group that says, oh my God, I've talked to 5 people. You're the only one. And you clearly know this space. So now they say, you're my guide, right? I want you to navigate me through the complexities. And again, they pull back from telling you how to do the work because they're trusting your expertise because you've done this before, right? Yeah. So clients will trust you to know that you're not doing this for the first time, right? And since you're an expert in your space and you're not doing it for the first time, it really helps to know, okay, is this someone who gets that or someone who doesn't, right? And a warning story delivers that value.
Yeah, so you become the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the story, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a prediction story, we've got a warning story. There's another couple you touched on out in Santa Monica. What's one of the others that we can? And at what point in the relationship do we start? Are there optimum points in the relationship where we can use these stories?
I use almost all these up front, really early on, right?
Right.
An empathy story is a story where you've both experienced some past pain, right? And you can talk through that pain. And then they start to trust you because they know you're going to protect them from their mistakes. That's where you shift from vendor to partner, right? And an empathy story could happen after the quote, after the proposal is delivered, right? So you can do it before, but you also can do it after when you send that bill and it's a little higher than they were imagining, right? And we'll get to the last one where it really helps you on pricing. But an empathy story, someone will come back and look at a quote and go, could I cut this out or could we not do this? And you can say, look, either you've had people here before, right? You've had vendors here before who take your money and run and they don't deliver. I've been in that. And you can walk through the past pain that you've lived with and they start nodding their head. Oh yeah, I've been there, right? Or you say, look, I understand that you want to cut this out, but you're cutting out the key part of what will deliver your results, right? In fact, let me walk you through and you can go back to warning stories or prediction stories. So empathy stories allow you to connect, and people start realizing, hey, you're not just in this for the money, which almost every single entrepreneur I know, almost every freelancer I know, none of them are like, I do this just for the money, right? There are people that are motivated by like, hey, you're in a nonprofit, I love nonprofits, or you're a tobacco store and I love cigars, or whatever it is. There's a passion that drives them. But if you don't know the person on the other side of the table, it's easy for them to think you're doing it just for the money. You're a mercenary,
Yeah.
right? And an empathy story helps you start connecting on a different level, right? Yes, you've been hurt before. I have a buddy of mine who uses empathy stories when he explains that all of the code he writes is on a GitHub repository that they have access to right away from the beginning, right? Like we will, and the language he uses is, we will never hold your code hostage. And you can see customers light up because they're like, oh my God, I had 2 developers that did that to me, right? And you go, no, I hate that when it happens to us, right? And I would hate that for you. So you have access to code all the time. Even if you're late paying your bill, like it is, like this code is available upfront out there, right? And it does amazing wonders, right? For the person on the other side to start feeling like, you know what, you're not just a vendor, you're a partner. I trust you, right?
Yeah, yeah. And you're actually getting them to trust you without saying, trust me.
Yeah, that's it, right? If you have to say trust me, it's game over, right?
That's right. So, you're doing it through story. You alluded to it. What's the story that we can tell to overcome the pricing objections?
Yeah. So it is what I call inspiration stories, which doesn't sound anything like pricing. But inspiration stories allow you to anchor people, right? So inspirations. So I bought a house 5 years ago, and it was all just dirt in the backyard, right? Just dirt. And I took my wife out in the backyard and I painted a picture of what I wanted, right? We're going to cut into the hill and we're going to put a pool there. But because we cut in the hill, they're going to have to do a lot less work to build kind of a staircase up. There's a waterfall that'll come down. I want the cave behind the waterfall with a bench so we can sit there. On this other side, I want a really big jacuzzi. Over here, we'll have the fire pit. We'll put a big roof over here so we can put couches out and we can smoke cigars. And I paint the whole picture. She's like, great, I love it. Go back in the house, and a couple of days later, I say, hey, I saw driving down the street that someone put some fake turf in the front yard. Get that phone number and call them and ask if we can get them to come put fake grass in our front yard. I don't want any grass in the back, and my son's allergic to grass, but if we could put fake turf in the front, that'd be great. So she calls the company, they send a guy out, right? Now I'm like you, I'm on video calls all day long, so I'm not in the meeting. It's just my wife and this guy. The guy comes in, apparently leaves, right? I'm busy for 2 hours, and then I walk into the kitchen. And I said, hey, did you get a quote from the guy? And she goes, he's still here, and points to the guy sitting in my living room. The dude has sat in my living room for 2 hours. I'm like, what's he doing here, right? And she said, oh, he said the project in the front, the grass was too small for them. They don't do that project, but they'll throw it in for free if we do the backyard with him. I'm like, what did you tell him about the? Oh, I told him the whole story of everything we want in the backyard. And I even told him that we don't need to finance it. We'll just pay cash. And I'm like, what? Right? So of course he decided to stay, right? In 2 hours, it's like, that's no problem. I'm waiting to sell this guy. And he walks in the backyard and he's repeating all the stuff I told him. And he's like, we can totally do it. And then he tells me 3 quick stories. The Jones house down the street, right? I don't know if you've seen them, right? If you've been to their backyard, and he starts to, and he anchors me on a price, right? Well, we paid for that. And he's watching my eyes the whole time, right? And then he tells me another house, and he tells me another. And the whole time he's telling me about these other properties, his prices are astronomical, right? But he's pulling out iPad with pictures and showing stuff. And of course, my wife's like, I want that. And what has he done? Right? He's painted inspirational stories of what this could be hillside. And I'm painting a future vision of what you could have and how you could enjoy it. And the kids, this will be the house that all the neighborhood comes to so that your kids aren't running around in other places. And I'm like, yeah, but I also heard 3 price points. I heard 3 price points, all of which were above what I wanted to spend. Right. And then of course he asked, hey, so how much you spend, looking to spend? And I wrote a book on pricing, so I'm not gonna negotiate with myself. So I said, no, hey buddy, I'm not negotiating with myself. You know what I want. You tell me what it's going to cost. And he says, well, here's the thing, right? Most of the customers, I've been doing this 25 years, and most of our customers, they have an idea of what they want, but their budget is typically about half of what it really will be. And I said something like, well, I'm not paying $150,000. And immediately, and I just blurted it out, right? Because I did the times 2 in my head. And And he's like, so your budget's about 75 grand. I'm like, dang it, right? How did he do that? He's like, this is a master, right? And in the end, he's like, well, I think we can do most of this for that budget, right? And of course, he came back, and for all of you people who write proposals, right, he did exactly what you've been taught to do. The base of everything I wanted was right under budget. But, you know, the cave and the waterfall, that's extra. And the solar heating of the pool, which will save me money in the long run, that's extra. And you don't have to decide that part today, right? We'll have several weeks to figure it out. And if you want to do anything on the hillside, bushes and trees to get some shade, right? That would be extra. But those aren't, that's separate, right? Of course, we ended up buying all of it, right? And spending a ridiculous amount of money, right? And I just said, look, I'm going to tell this story forever. To at least make me feel better and make some money off it. But
yeah, exactly.
But what an inspiration story does when you do it right is it turns you into the facilitator of their dreams, right? Yeah. You understand where they're trying to go. You understand the destination. You paint the picture, and you can anchor them by painting 1, 2, 3 other pictures that are very similar to them at price points. And you might say, oh, you want a website? We did this one website for ABC or Disney, and it was $500,000. And they're like, oh man, I don't have, right? But you're like, oh, okay. But I'm just, and you can even say, I'm not saying it has to be that much, but I'm just telling you this one feature sounded very similar to what you were talking about. Or man, this other site for 100,000, right? And this other site for 50,000. They may have thought I was thinking 5,000, right? But you never know until you get to the point of talking about, proposals and good, better, best, what they're willing to go to, because now they've heard these stories. They've started thinking about their future, what they envision. You're the facilitator, and they come back and they go, hey, I don't have that kind of money, but what can we do for $20,000? And you just took them from 5 to 20 just by telling the right stories.
Exactly. And in a perfect world, if you're telling these stories as part of your content marketing, you'll be attracting the right kind of leads and clients in the first place, and you won't be having the conversation about whether it's going to be $5,000 or $10,000 because your clients already know that you're operating at a different end of the spectrum.
It's totally true, and I think maybe the main point of all these stories, right, is that if you sit in a room face to face with someone, and you're doing that first hour of consulting, or you're prepping before you put a proposal, and you tell several of these stories, you've become the one who's been there, done that, the expert. The authority. You're the one that can facilitate their dreams. By the end of that time, if you've done this right, they're going to be asking you. They're going to be pitching you why you should be on their project. They're going to pitch their backyard expertise and begging you for the job, not the other way around. Most freelancers are sitting here begging for the task. And what they're really doing is they're saying, hey, hire me to do tasks. If you're being hired to do tasks, you're either not telling the right stories or they're not believing your stories. But if you do tell the right stories, what ends up happening is you shift who's pitching who. They start telling you why their project's so interesting and exciting, right? You go to a nonprofit, you tell several stories, you work it through, and they're like, oh my God, we need you here. And let me explain to you why this is such an important, like we're putting, wells across the globe. Like this is important stuff. Like we want you, not you're like, oh, please hire me because I really need a job this month, right? If you tell the right stories, the pitching shifts. They pitch you because they want a proxy, they want a guide, they want a partner, they want a facilitator, they want to work with you. And that's when you've got the right segment of people ready to hear your proposal.
That's awesome. Courses.chrislema.com to check out Chris's courses, and also search for him on Clarity FM and check out liquidweb.com for the managed WordPress and managed WooCommerce hosting. Hey, Chris, thanks for being a part of it again. I really appreciate it. Always fun hanging out.
Awesome. Take care, buddy.
Thanks, gang. That's the WP Elevation podcast. Another episode wrapped. Subscribe over at iTunes, wpelevation.com/iTunes, and leave us a rating and a review. It helps us come up in the search results. And also check us out on YouTube and Facebook. I look forward to seeing you again and talking with you shortly on the podcast. Until then, I'm Troy Dean. Go Elevate.